There's others? Okay, good.
Just relax.
Sure.
Okay, we'll be bringing the jury. Traditionally, he'll say, all rise, stand up, and then I'll sit you down.
Very good.
I texted him.
Who's David?
Yeah. Maybe everybody's not quite back yet.
So you want me to go see if he's open?
No, I can do that.
I was looking for her kids. I wanted to just do like those trays. So she's in the so back page. You had a market here for her or a little bit for her.
I love it.
I showed my dad Judge Miller's courtroom, and he was like, wow, it's a lot smaller than here. He was surprised at the different sizes.
I miss what we used to call the bowling alley. It was 9B. And it was longer, probably just a little bit longer than this main area here, about the box. But the jury was like situated over here away from the judge. So they had their own entrance in and out to the jury. It was a good room to try a case.
All the big ones were there back in the day.
Hard to believe we've been here over 11 years now.
I can remember, well, the Ucker case was in there. Jim O'Grady prosecuting David Ucker. It's a big deal. That's
We
all right.
had 270 shooter was in there. And then Buzz Lukens. Remember how they had the whole back of the building just lined up with the media?
All rise.
gentlemen, I hope you had a wonderful lunch. Doctor, you are still under oath.
Yes.
Ms. Bucher? Bucher, getting closer.
You got it. Thank you, Your Honor. All right, Dr. Moody, before we took a break for lunch, I believe we were talking about medication.
Okay, yes.
I do want to come back to that, but I also want to finish up the pre-extubation stuff
Okay.
we were talking about. So can you talk to me about agonal breathing?
Sure. Just describe it to you, or?
Well, how do you explain, first of all, do you explain that to the family members?
Yes.
What do you tell them?
Make them aware that it is possible that they may witness their loved one experience what we call agonal breathing. And again, these are individualized symptoms, so it's hard to generalize, but when somebody is at the end of life and taking those final breaths, it can be agonal, meaning there can be some distress where their work of breathing is increased or appears distressful. In most cases, it's harder for the family to witness that than it is for the patient to experience. Most patients are not aware or in distress, but it can be visibly hard for the family to see, and sometimes it can be distressful to the patient, and in those cases, we administer medicine.
Okay, doctor, what is it? I mean, we're not doctors.
Sure.
You use that phrase, what do you mean?
It's distressed breathing associated with typically the end of life.
Okay.
And you said it appears to be painful, is that what you said?
It can,
Judge, reading.
It is. New question. Or same question, just done right?
I'll move on. So do you explain this to family members?
yes, we'll make them aware that it's something they may see.
And you said sometimes you provide medication for this?
Yes,
What medications?
most often morphine
Okay,
in my practice.
okay. And going back to medication now, you've already explained the order set and how you do it.
Yes.
Do you then order the nurses to administer? Or how does the medicine actually get to the patient once you've ordered it?
So once those orders are in, there is typically a dose of the medications, most often morphine, sometimes or frequently in combination with Ativan. There is typically an order for them to give a dose of that morphine before the tube comes out, so that is a definite order that they will then give. After that, the orders are what we call PRN, which means as needed. So then based on the patient's needs. Some patients may not need any further doses. Some may need frequent doses. That's, again, patient by patient.
How much do you order beforehand for the patient to be given?
I mean, again, there's some variability.
Relevance.
I'm sorry?
Relevance.
Overruled.
My standard practice is anywhere from 4 to 10 milligrams of morphine.
And post-extubation, what do you generally prescribe?
And again, we're generalizing, so I can't say, that there aren't cases where more or less is ordered. Probably, and those are every 15-minute doses, typically 2 to 4 milligrams.
Yeah, we're speculating.
Okay, overruled.
Go ahead.
Those 2 15-minute doses are typically start at 2 to 4 milligrams, but up to 10 milligrams would not be outside of the bounds of what I've ordered.
And that's of the morphine.
Correct.
How about benzodiazepine?
Typically, I use Ativan. Versed is another alternative for benzodiazepines. In my practice, I'll use Ativan, typically 2 milligrams.
And is that something that you continue to medicate with as well?
Only if it's needed, but in the circumstances where it is, yes.
But it's possible?
Yes.
Now, are you aware of what a Pyxis machine is?
I am.
And do you have any understanding of how it works at all?
I've never, it's something that the nurses and pharmacists use. I have some idea, they enter something and the medications come out, but
Okay.
no.
Are you familiar at all with the override function of a Pyxis?
Other than that it exists, I'm not.
Okay. Have you ever ordered a nurse to use the override function for any purpose?
Yes.
What purpose was that for?
The one that comes to mind are vasopressors. So those we talked about are medications that help support a patient's blood pressure. So in circumstances where a patient is suddenly very unstable, I need those medications, those vasopressors very quickly. So I will ask the nurse to basically get out of the Pyxis whatever vasopressor you can get the quickest to save that patient.
And have you ever ordered a nurse to use the override function for a palliative extubation?
No.
And why not?
Well, I guess because it's not an emergency. So the cases where we are using that are those examples I gave where there's a really emergent need and I need that medication at that moment.
Now, you've stated that your preferred medication is morphine and Ativan, correct?
In my practice, yes.
Yes, this is in your practice. Do you ever use fentanyl in your practice in any way?
Yes.
And what do you generally use that for?
Two uses. One is in patients in the ICU when they're on a ventilator to maintain their sedation. And it's very commonly employed in those cases. Either as a bolus dose, meaning we'll give it through the IV, and a push dose, or with a continuous infusion, meaning it runs slowly over a continuous period of time to maintain the patient's sedation. The other time, is in procedures where we'll use it.
Okay. And are you familiar with what the conversion factor is from fentanyl to morphine and vice versa?
Yes, I am.
What is that?
I believe it would be 10 milligrams of morphine is equal to 100 micrograms of fentanyl.
Okay. So have you ever used 100 milligrams of morphine for a palliative extubation?
Sustained.
I'm just talking about her practices.
No, that wasn't what you asked.
Have you ever used fentanyl in any palliative extubation first?
I haven't personally, no.
What is the highest dose you can recall giving of morphine for a palliative extubation?
No.
Objection.
Strike the question.
Can we approach, Your Honor?
Yeah.
All right.
You guys busy back there? I didn't hear anything.
No, I still get tired of it.
Mr. Vice.
The feeling when I get home tonight, it'll be gone. Yeah. And I'm going out, So we didn't have the same.
Apparently they did that. No. Joe skipped the verse. She shared. I don't.
Well, you're not on, so she has to.
I was just talking.
I don't know if it's necessary
still need her to get set up. Okay. Rephrase the question.
Thank you. So in reference, so we're going back to the conversion between morphine and fentanyl. In your practice, have you ever used 100 milligrams of morphine during a palliative extubation?
Objection has been answered.
Overruled.
Thank you. Have you ever given in your practice 50 milligrams of morphine for a palliative extubation?
No.
And if my math is correct based on what you said, what is 50 milligrams equal to? In
The fentanyl, you mean?
fentanyl.
Unsustained.
Have you ever given in your practice 25 milligrams of morphine for a palliative extubation?
And to clarify, you're referring in one single
Okay,
dose.
hold on. When we have an objection, that kind of day. Okay? You're just going on your usual?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear it.
You said objection, I stopped the witness, and I came back to you because I'm deciding on which way you are going with
Same
this.
objection.
I'll let her answer.
Also asked and answered.
I will let her answer. Go ahead and ask her again.
Thank you. Have you ever given 25 milligrams of morphine during a palliative extubation?
And to clarify, you're talking in a single dose, correct?
Yes.
No.
And in your practice, what is the largest dose of morphine that you can recall giving to a patient for a palliative extubation?
Objection.
Sustained.
Let's talk about post-extubation, the medications that you give. Do you order all of the medication at once for your pre- and post-extubation process?
Typically, I will order,
Objection leading.
I'm going to let her have it on transition. You can answer.
I will order what we talked about, the PRN or as-needed dosages, but I may adjust these in real time based on the patient's needs.
What types of things would lead you to adjust?
If we were not meeting the patient's needs, for instance, that they were experiencing symptoms of distress or clinical signs of distress, I may increase the dose. Perhaps I may decrease it as well if I did not feel that they needed a dose that I had ordered.
And do you instruct the nurses on how much to administer?
I place the orders and then they follow those orders.
Okay. And just for clarification, what is in the orders? So you obviously the
Okay,
dosage.
We've been through this before.
Okay.
Let's move on.
All right. All right, let's talk about progress notes.
Okay.
Can you tell the members of the jury what are progress notes?
Objection. Answered.
I'm sorry.
Asked and answered.
Yeah, she discussed it earlier today. When she was talking about the difference, the notes and night and everything else.
So the reason I'm asking is it's a transitional question. I have an exhibit. I just wanted to
Now we'll just go to the exhibit.
All right. Just from Belisari's records. May I approach the witness, Your
You
Honor?
may.
You can just. And I'm handing you what is marked as State's Exhibit 1C.
Okay.
And you can hand that back to me whenever you're ready. Do you recognize this?
Sure.
What is this?
It's part of a progress note.
Okay.
Yeah, it's one page of one.
And what's the name of the patient? Sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry. It's Ms. Joanne Belisari.
Okay. Your Honor, may I publish?
You may. If there's no objection.
No issues. Go ahead.
So, is this what I just showed you here?
Yes.
And can you explain to me the reason there's this language here in the progress note?
I guess two reasons. First, it sort of sums up a situation, and then when we are billing for critical care time, which is simply how we bill patients that are critically ill in the ICU, the billing guidelines stipulate that we put a statement in there explaining our critical care time and then how much time we spent with the patient.
Okay. So it says life support measures, and then the last part, without which she would not survive.
Correct.
Are you, in this record here, are you opining at all to her prognosis?
No, that is a real-time statement. So just in that moment, on that day, the patient would not survive without mechanical ventilation or vasopressors.
Okay, thank you. Now, I would like to go back to November of 2018.
Okay.
Is that when you became aware of the allegations against Dr. Husel?
Yes, late November. Yes.
I'm sorry?
It was later in November, the
Okay.
day before Thanksgiving.
And how did you learn about the allegations?
As I mentioned, it was
Objection, calls for hearsay.
I'll let you have it. How'd you find out?
I was away. It was the day before Thanksgiving, and I got a call from my office manager.
Okay, that's enough right
Okay.
there.
And without telling me the specifics of the conversation or what exactly was said by the other person, what did you learn?
Okay. I mean, there were a couple steps in between there, but I learned that the prior night, which would have been Tuesday night, that Dr. Husel had administered.
Objection, hearsay.
I'll permit it.
That Dr. Husel had administered 1,000 micrograms of fentanyl and 10 milligrams of Versed in a palliative vent withdrawal situation, and this had elicited concern, and therefore he was going to be placed on a leave while the hospital investigated.
And I think I know what you were trying to do when you're trying to give the information before. Why is it that you would be made aware of this?
Dr. Swanner is the one who had reached out. He was trying to reach Dr. Ralston, who was my partner, who was the medical director of the ICU at the time. Again, right before a holiday, Dr. Ralston was on vacation, his cell phone was off, and therefore I reached out to Dr. Swanner, not knowing what the situation was, but basically, is it something I can help with in the ICU? And then he disclosed to me what I had told you.
So Dr. Swanner contacted you?
No. Is it okay if I go through the steps?
No.
Okay.
Okay. After you became aware, did you at any point reach out to Dr. Husel?
No. Well, not at that point, no.
At any time after that?
Dr. Husel reached out to me in early December.
Okay. Did you ever send any messages to him?
in January. That was after news broke, so to speak, of the story.
And what was your purpose for reaching out to him?
He was a colleague and somebody that I had liked, respected, worked with for 5 years at that point. And it was upsetting to see what he was going through and his family. So it was reaching out in that capacity.
And you said it was in January that you sent a text message?
Correct.
When you sent that message, were you aware of the full extent of the allegations at the time?
No, I was not part of the investigation. I was aware of scuttlebutt, but I had not been privileged to the investigation itself.
Okay. Nothing further.
Cross?
Please report. Madam Prosecutor. Good afternoon, Mrs. Doe. Good afternoon, Dr. Moody.
Hi there.
Pleasure to meet you. This is our first time speaking, right?
Yes.
Okay. I'm going to ask you some questions. If you don't understand the question, just ask me to repeat it. Sometimes I have a boggled way of saying things, okay? All right. Having said that, we kind of bounced around quite a bit during your direct, so I'm going to try and do the same thing, okay? All right. Now, you said that when the process of, before the process of the extubation begins, that you have a conversation with the family, right?
Yes.
Remember that line of questioning? Okay. And you said, and I wrote this down, that the whole situation is very sad.
Of course.
Okay. And it's not an easy thing to do to speak to a family about the potential passing of their loved one, I assume.
Sure.
And it's also not easy for them to hear. Correct?
No, it's, yeah, very sad.
This lady over here is taking down everything you say, and you have to verbalize it. I'm not picking on you.
Oh, sure.
I just have, if
No, I agree with you. It's very sad.
Constructive answer, okay?
Sure.
All right, so sometimes it's not easy for them to hear, right?
Right.
And in fact, these conversations are sometimes had multiple times, correct?
Yes, that's true.
Okay. And that can also include other doctors having that conversation.
Yes, yeah.
And you went over in your testimony some of the things that happens during the terminal extubation, like the agonal breathing, correct?
Yes.
Now, fair to say, when someone is being taken off the ventilator, the oxygen levels, there's a huge difference in the oxygen levels, correct?
Do you mean in the oxygen being delivered to them?
Correct.
Yes.
Okay, so essentially when we're breathing in this air, it's 21%, right?
Right.
And we're getting 21% oxygen at this time in this room.
Correct.
When they're on a ventilator, that's 100%, right?
Only in the worst cases. It may be as low as 30% in somebody who's not requiring as much oxygen.
But many times it's much higher than room temperature.
Oh, of course, yes.
Okay, so there's the adjustment to that patient has to make, right?
Yes.
And you mentioned the agonal breathing. That also affects their reserves, correct?
Could you rephrase that maybe?
Sure. When someone is agonally breathing, they are utilizing their reserves to go above and beyond and breathe extra, right?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. And for the jury to help follow along, a person can tire out by agonal breathing, right?
Yes.
Okay. And if they tire out agonal breathing, they stop breathing, right? You have to say yes or no.
Yes.
Okay. And I can't see your lips because of
That's true, the mask.
It's okay. I understand the reason behind the mask, so forgive me if I ask you.
Sure.
So a person can tire out, and sometimes they die sooner because they tire out due to the agonal breathing, right?
It's a very individual
We're going to get
case.
into patient specifics,
Yeah.
but that's a scenario that sometimes occurs, correct?
There's the potential for that, yes.
Okay. And there's other things, other distress that a family may have to suffer when seeing someone extubated, correct?
Sure.
Some of them will be, for example, the death rattle. Are you familiar with that?
Yes.
Okay. And can you tell the ladies and gentlemen of the jury what a death rattle is?
It relates to the secretions that we all tend to produce, but at the end of life cannot manage, and therefore it will create this rattle due to the secretions in the back of a patient's throat that are pooling there.
And that can sometimes sound like boiling water, right?
It can. Again, it varies. It's not always this dramatic.
And in addition to that, a patient can also cough up blood.
They can. That's not a common occurrence.
In addition to that, one of the other things that they can do is have foam coming out of their mouth, correct?
Yes, I suppose. Again, these are case-by-case type things.
All of these things are very distressing to see as a family member, right?
Sure.
And there's nothing you can do medically to erase those memories, those last moments from the patient family's minds, can you?
No, but we do want to meet our patients' needs, so we manage those symptoms to the best of our ability.
Right, and that's one of the things all of these things that I just mentioned are things you try to think of ahead of time, right?
Yes.
Okay, and obviously you don't want your patient going through these things, correct?
No.
And you also don't want their family seeing these things, right?
No.
Okay. Now, you mentioned that you utilize an order set that we've heard quite a bit about in this trial. Do you recall that testimony with the prosecutor on your direct?
Oh, yes, yeah.
Okay. Now, again, these are not, or at the time in question in this case, these were not mandatory in any way, shape, or form, correct?
No, they were not.
In fact, different doctors have different preferences based on their training as to what drugs they like to use during a palliative extubation, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And you're, I believe I heard you say you're an internal medicine doctor?
Yes.
Okay, so you studied, you're board certified in internal medicine?
Right.
Okay. And you're aware that Dr. Husel's background is anesthesiology, right?
Yes.
So his background and training naturally differs from yours.
That's right.
And his familiarity, I knew I was going to bundle up the word. And it's a simple one. His familiarity with certain drugs may be different than yours.
Yes.
Okay. Now, may I approach the witness judge with these three?
Yeah.
I'm going to show you state's exhibits 17A, B, and C.
Okay. Thank you.
Dr. Moody, can you tell the ladies and gentlemen of the jury if fentanyl is on any one of those order sets?
If you don't mind just giving me a minute here.
No, not at all.
Mr. Page. I don't see it on these two. I'll look at this one. I don't see it listed on any of these.
I don't understand.
Okay, is that a question?
I'm gonna, yeah. Are you, you're aware this case is about fentanyl, correct?
Right.
And you've been shown these order sets in the middle of this trial, but yet they don't have any mention of fentanyl in them, do they?
No.
So if I'm a doctor and I choose to utilize a different drug other than those, that's what's on those order sets, at the time in question in this case, I could have used those drugs, correct?
Yes.
Now, you mentioned something about vasopressors and how at times you've utilized nurses or you've instructed nurses to override the PICSA system to get vasopressors, right?
Yes.
And that's because vasopressors are a form of life support, right?
They are.
And they help the heartbeat.
Yes, and they increase the blood pressure.
They increase your blood pressure. That is a thing. Vasopressors also, they're forgive me. It's been a long day. Vasopressors act quickly, right?
Yes.
Okay. And vasopressors are one of the life support measures that are utilized in the ICU.
Right.
Along with a ventilator. Okay, got to say yes.
Yes.
All right. Now, vasopressors are also fast acting when you turn them off, right?
Correct.
So if a patient has a vasopressor and you turn them off with the extubation while you're extubating a patient, it's 1 to 2 minutes, right?
It depends how much of that medication they're on.
Okay, but if they're maxed out on vasopressors and you turn those off, that blood pressure may dip quickly.
Typically it does. There have been exceptions. Sometimes patients do things differently than we expect.
But typically it does.
Yes, yeah.
Okay, and that could immediately affect the heart to stop.
Correct.
Now, you were shown State's Exhibit 1C. Do you recall this?
Yes.
And for the record, it's 1C. And we're talking about Ms. Balasari.
Right.
And you state here, she's on full life support measures, including mechanical ventilation and vasopressors, without which she would not survive, correct?
Right.
Now, if you take her off the mechanical ventilator and you turn off the vasopressors, that would hasten Ms. Balasari's life, correct?
Sustained.
You're saying here that she won't survive without this ventilator, correct?
Correct.
And she won't survive without these vasopressors, right?
Correct.
So if she doesn't have them, she's going to die.
Yes,
Okay. And these two things are keeping her alive.
that's correct.
So if you take them off, it's going to hasten her death, right?
Sure.
And that's essentially the case for all terminal extubations, correct?
Yes, if a patient is terminal and dependent on those life support measures, yes.
So, after someone is extubated, what do you do when after the medication is given and the extubation takes place? I know you said some family members stay, some leave. What do? You go to your office?
No, I'm typically still in the ICU, and it's, again, the ICU is a very fluid place, so there may be other patients and needs that need to be attended to. I will typically check back on the patient and see how they are doing and how their family is.
If a patient is actively dying on life support, well, let me backtrack a little bit. A patient can die while on life support, right?
Sure.
So someone could have a ventilator and fast suppressors, and they could still die.
Yes.
Okay? And if someone is actively dying while on these life support measures, then as a doctor, you feel compelled to go to the family and let them know that this is a very distinct possibility, right?
Yes.
And that time is of the essence to make a determination whether they want to die on life support or have the tubes removed, correct?
That's right.
So if they are actively dying, that becomes an emergent situation, right?
Could you maybe rephrase it?
Sure. If a patient is actively dying while on life support system, while on vasopressors and mechanical vent, if they're actively dying while that happens, it then becomes an emergent situation to make that determination. Are we going to take off the vent, or are we going to leave him or her on, correct?
Yes and no. I mean, because what's going to happen is going to happen at that point. We do try to clarify pretty emergently with the family what I had talked about, that DNR CCA, because if they're what we call a full code, meaning we do everything, then we would be performing CPR and all of that in those cases. So that part of the conversation is done urgently to make that decision.
Right, and if a patient is dying on life support, you have to let the family know, right?
Of course.
And at that time, they have to make a decision, correct?
Right.
And sometimes, depending on how ill the person is, and I know it's patient specific, that becomes an emergency, right?
Again, but things are going to, you know what I mean? We still support the patient and respond
I'm
to
aware of
them.
that, but it becomes an emergency, right? Because time becomes, let me rephrase that to make it easier. Maybe you might like this question better. Time is of the essence now, right?
To a point, but we don't, even if the family said, okay, we don't want to escalate care or resuscitate them, we don't emergently need to take the tube out. I mean, they may simply pass away, even doing everything we're doing, or by just simply turning off the vasopressors.
And you as a doctor can give them that option to die on the vent or not, right?
If time allows. Sometimes patients pass away before we have that opportunity.
That's the point I'm trying to make. So time is now of the essence in that type of a situation, correct?
Objection, asked and answered.
I'll let you have it. Go ahead and answer. Can you answer that?
Yes. Yeah, I mean, it's certainly a time-sensitive situation.
Okay, so there are occasions when a patient, is actively dying on life support where, I guess you could call it an emergency, right?
Just ask that question.
You nodded your head. Is that a yes?
No, stop. Strike it, ladies and gentlemen. Strike the question, strike the answer.
I'm sorry, Judge, I misunderstood you.
Well, you asked the same question again.
My apologies.
It may have been different words, it's the same question.
I got you. Now, you mentioned that depending on the situation of where you go after a extubation, it depends on the situation, right?
Right.
So if a patient is actively dying, you're going to stay close by. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, I'm generally in the ICU and everything's fairly condensed there.
Now, you're aware that there's a monitoring station where the nurses can sit after an extubation and see the heart rate and the respiratory rate of the patient, even though they're extubated, correct?
Sure, and we can all see that, not just the nurses, yeah.
Gotcha. So a nurse or a doctor, once the life support's withdrawn, the family's inside with their loved one, can sit back and give them their privacy and still observe what's going on, right?
Yes, with the vital signs, yeah.
With vital signs. And they can make a determination by looking at that, whether the heart stops first or whether the patient stops breathing, correct?
You can, but sometimes the respiratory rate slows quite a bit and then they may take a breath. So there's some variability to all of that.
But you can definitely see when the heart stops, right?
Yes.
And And then you can also, depending on the situation, can tell whether they're still breathing after their heart stops.
Yeah, I mean, these things happen sort of simultaneous. It's, I don't know how much we pay attention to what stops first. I mean, the bottom line is the patient has passed.
And also bottom line is clinically, when a patient's heart stops, that's when you determine the time of death, right?
Correct, yeah.
Now, you mentioned that you have dealt with pharmacists in the past where they come to you and they ask you questions about medication or sometimes tell you they're not accepting that medication, right?
Yeah, it's usually collaborative as opposed to that they're not accepting.
Now, as a prescribing doctor, is that something you rely on when you give an order for medication, that at some point someone who's trained in a different area than you is going to be looking at this, and if there's an issue with it, they'll bring it to your attention?
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly something I'm aware and appreciative of. I'm still ultimately responsible for every order I place.
And you're also aware that a pharmacist is responsible as well for their end of the process, right?
Yes, yeah.
Now, just want to make sure I have everything that I covered with you. Now, as it relates to Ms. Balasari, you were in fact the doctor who initially had the conversation with the family as to what Ms. Balasari's preferences were in terms of life support, right?
That's right.
Okay. And you noted that in the chart as well?
Correct.
That's something you would write in your progress notes?
Yeah, or sometimes a separate note, like a separate family meeting note where I'll expound on the discussions.
And you also had the conversation with another patient by the name of Tracy Young. Did you not?
I'm not familiar with that.
Okay. Are you familiar with the name Tracy Young?
I know it's come up in this case, but I have not reviewed any records, and I don't recall that case.
Okay. Can I get that chart? While he's getting that, you said that you're aware that it came up in this case, that it's come up in this case. Has anyone from Mount Carmel ever come to you and discuss let me strike that. Has anyone from Mount Carmel ever come to you and discuss this patient, Tracy Young?
Objection?
No.
Hearsay?
Well, she's already got it out. Now, do you still want to maintain your objection?
I'll withdraw it.
Okay. Continue on.
Okay. What about law enforcement? Has law enforcement ever spoken to you about Tracy Young?
Objection?
Okay, if he's not asking what was said, so has anybody from law enforcement approached you about this matter?
No. Well, I mean, about this particular patient? Is that what you're asking?
Correct.
Not with respect to this particular patient.
You, in fact, did have a conversation with law enforcement, though, right?
I did.
And it wasn't until 2020 that you actually had the first opportunity to have any conversations with law enforcement, correct?
Yes.
So it was like a year after they had arrested William Husel.
It might have been more. I think it was October of 2020, so more than that.
A year and a half?
Yeah.
Year and a couple months, right?
Right.
And when they came to you, they never asked you about Tracy Young at all?
No.
Now, I want to see if I can have, wait a minute. Make sure there's a conversation. Tracy.
It was in the bucket, but everything else in that bucket got taken out, so I don't know where you do it.
All right. That's okay. Okay, if I showed you your progress note on Tracy Young, might that refresh your recollection as to perhaps whether in fact you spoke with the family about removing care?
It may. Like I said, I haven't had the opportunity to review any of this patient's case before.
Your Honor, can we approach, please?
Yeah, we can. Ladies and gentlemen, find out something new about your person next to you. David? Okay. I'm still trying to get They've got a break in a bit. They got donuts. From where they going? It's like Lay's potato chips. Can you eat just one of those things? Still hungry? Yeah. Tell me when you're ready. Mr. Baez.
Really quickly, I'm going to show you your progress note and see if it helps refresh your recollection, and then we'll discuss it a little bit.
Sure, that's fine.
All right? May I approach?
May.
Thank you. If just you don't mind giving me a couple minutes, because I haven't
Take
reviewed
your
this
time. Do
before.
what you need to do. That's fine. Okay, let me get that from you.
Sure.
Okay.
No. Do your work first.
Sure. Now, ma'am, you had a chance to review that record, correct?
Just now, I have not previously reviewed her records, though.
Okay. Did that refresh your recollection as to what you did on Ms. Young in this particular progress note?
It does to an extent. It looks like that was 2014, so we are going back
Yes.
quite a ways.
Yes. And I definitely want to point that out. May I publish?
It depends. Well, there's an objection. Hold on. Can I see it?
Do you want to see it?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
Since I'm the one making the call. So you're just going to talk about the first page?
Yes. Not really diving too much into this.
Okay. I'll note the objection. I said I note the objection.
Dr. Moody, showing you what's been marked TY page 111 through 112. And specifically, this is a progress note of yours, correct?
Yes, a code blue note specifically.
And looking at the date here, this would have been entered in November 23rd of 2014, correct?
Correct.
And that is before Ms. Balasari's, who is the count one in this case, on 2015, right?
Yes.
Okay. So in this note, I guess it basically talks about the code blue that Ms. Young experienced. Is that correct?
That's right.
And subsequent to that, you met with the patient's mother and sister, correct?
Yes, along with the palliative care team and the chaplain.
And the chaplain and the charge nurse
Yes.
were present, correct?
Yes.
So multiple people are present during your talk.
Correct.
Okay, and you basically gave them Ms. Young's prognosis, is that correct?
That's right.
Okay, and you state that you will defer to the timing of this to the family.
Right.
Now, ma'am, when you, as a doctor, some of the three things that you rely on are your education, correct? Is that a yes?
Yes. Sorry. Yes.
Your experience,
Right.
correct? And whatever literature or studies there might be out there that you can access, correct?
Sure. Things certainly become updated as years go on.
Because doctors study and conduct studies on all sorts of things, correct?
Correct.
It's an ongoing science.
Yes.
Okay. And fair to say, equally qualified and equally trained doctors can have two completely different opinions, right?
Yes.
Okay. And one could be right, one could be wrong, or they could both be right or wrong, right?
That's fair.
Okay. How important is your experience with patients to you?
It certainly resonates, and I learn a lot from each case.
Is it what you rely on to continue to practice medicine?
Not entirely, but it's certainly a component of it.
It's a factor.
Yes.
And if you, I know during direct examination you were asked about your experiences and what you do during palliative withdrawals. If you conduct something, if you utilize a certain drug and it doesn't quite work out the way you had initially anticipated, you take that into consideration for the next patient, don't you?
Yes.
And if you also, on the flip side of that, if you give some medicine or a dose and that works out well for the patient, that's also something you consider for the next patient, right?
Yes.
Now, you were shown and discussed a little bit about how things have changed, or that there's now the order sets are mandatory
Right.
at Mount Carmel, correct?
Right.
Now, subsequent to this changing, now you're required to follow a certain set of orders, right?
That's right.
Okay.
Well, an order set. There's options within that order set.
An order set. And you're also required to follow a certain amount of policies too, correct?
Sure.
Okay. You, in fact, have had a bad experience utilizing those new procedures, right?
I don't know specifically what you're referring to.
Sure. I got to show it to one more. Judge, do I have to show to your entire prosecution team?
Well, she handed it to him. I guess he's kind of stuck, aren't you?
Well, yeah, Your Honor, you run the courtroom, but I can consult with my fellow prosecutors, sir.
Okay.
I'll give them a minute to hug, Judge.
You guys want your break because it's coming close.
You know, I don't think we've seen this before from the defense, so I just...
Okay, hold on. Stop. You guys want a break? No? Well, I'm going to end up in a sidebar here in a couple seconds, and you're going to have to talk to David. Why don't you guys give me a little bit of loving on this one? Okay? David? All rise. Sorry to be so demanding. It's like I'm a husband, right?
You understand. Take a break.
Yeah.